Hi, I'm Tom Sniper Boy who loves history and wants to share it with you. So let's get started. And put your hands up for history! Okay, so today's topic is, drumroll, America. Yes, the history of America. Okay, so we had George Washington as our president. Soon enough, we had John Adams. And George Washington was very popular. Americans loved this man. And he was very popular. And then we had John Adams, who was not as popular, but yeah, he was only for one term. Thomas Jefferson, a lot more popular. And then we have James Madison. And now we have the War of 1812, which ended in no victory at all for anybody. Turns out it was a rematch between Britain and America. And President Madison didn't know what to do, so it was kind of a stalemate. Soon enough, we had John Quincy Adams, son of former President John Adams, and James Monroe, starting the Monroe Doctrine, basically understanding that America holds everything here in America, not the people back in Europe. And then let's go later. You have Andrew Jackson, and after that you have Martin Van Buren. Then after that you have William Henry Harrison. Then let's skip to the Civil War. Okay, we have President Lincoln. He has won the election and he becomes president, but the South wasn't happy. You see, he had been a long time hater of slavery, and the South supported slavery. And there was a different divide between free states and swing states. There was lots of states that were, like slave states, and lots of states that were free states. The free states were the northern states. The slave states were the southern states. But America didn't really like it. In fact, the northerners hated it. The southerners just loved it. It was very good for their crops. They kind of used slave labor and all that stuff. And so the South broke away and formed the Confederate States of America. They had Jefferson Davis as their president. And turns out the Confederate States of America was actually winning in the first year of the war. They were getting some victories. For 2 straight years, the Union wasn't doing very good, and President Abraham Lincoln wasn't very happy about it. He didn't know what to do, so he just kept trying. He wanted the war to end, but he wanted it to end in America's favor. He kept going. Then he had a general, George McClellan. He was good in some ways, but turns out Abraham Lincoln didn't really like him because he was too cautious. And that wasn't good about him. So he fired him. And guess what? He had another general in mind, Ulysses Grant, who actually was doing pretty well for the Union Army. He had scored some major victories for the Confederate States of America. And Lincoln grew to really like this man. And then later, the Confederates started losing all of a sudden. Soon enough, the Union had some major victories, like the Battle of Gettysburg, which was basically what made America win the Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln makes a speech. And there's just one thing. Abraham Lincoln had an election coming up. And guess what? The war was very unpopular. So people were looking for someone who would look to end the war as soon as possible. And guess who came up? General McClellan. Yeah, the guy Lincoln had fired. But it turns out the Union scored some major victories during this time. And Abraham Lincoln was all to not blame. And McClellan started losing support. And Abraham Lincoln ended up winning against McClellan at a victory. And then Abraham Lincoln, he died. Yes, he died. By John Wilkes Booth. Yes, he was an actor, but Abraham Lincoln was killed, and he was killed too, the assassin. and Abraham Lincoln was dead. There was Andrew Johnson who became president. Yeah, didn't have anything good about him, really. There was Ruth III Hayes. There was, and then after that, there was Ulysses Grant, who, funny enough, was quite popular. Yeah, he was a Republican, like his predecessor, Abraham Lincoln. Look at that. And turns out that Ulysses Grant was popular. He had won himself a term, too. And then after that, it was pretty much all good and golly. We had Ruth III Hayes, and let's skip to, as many might say, the 1910s. We have President Woodrow Wilson, and he is not as popular as some other presidents. He was one of the few Democratic presidents in our lifetime. And he got America into a war, specifically World War I. Turns out America won that war, so President Woodrow Wilson was all to be happy about. But he didn't really like it really too much because he himself wasn't doing too good. And he didn't run for re-election, yeah. And soon enough, we had Warren Harding died. Calvin Coolidge didn't run for re-election. And then there was Herbert Hoover. Now we have something very important. The Great Depression, which I will talk about in part 3. Okay, the video is done. Goodbye.